Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us during today's online postgraduate webinar for our PhD at the Institute of Historical Research. My name is Noor. I'm a Senior Marketing Officer here at the School of Advanced Study, and I'm joined today by Programme Director, Professor Claire Langhamer, who is going to be talking about the programme and answering some of your questions. So firstly, I would just like to remind you that the application deadline for this programme is the 31st of July 2025 for you to join the September intake. I hope this webinar today answers all of your questions about studying a PhD with us, and it'll help you start your application process and lead you to submit an application. So for the first part of this webinar, Claire will be talking through a presentation about studying the programme and how it can benefit you. Following this, we'll have a live Q&A session where we'll try and answer as many of your questions as we can. There is a chat box on the right side of the screen, so you might need to open that. You can pop your questions in there, and we'll keep an eye on that. We also have a marketing team in the background who will be posting links and messages in the chat box. So just keep an eye there in case we respond to your questions there or add some extra details there. Okay, so we are good to begin. Claire, would you like to introduce yourself and talk through your presentation?
Thank you so much, Noor. Hello, everybody. So my name's Claire Langhamer, and I'm Director of the Institute of Historical Research. But I'm not here as Director. I'm here because I'm also Acting Director of Studies at the moment, whilst one of my colleagues is on well-earned research leave. We tend to talk about the Institute of Historical Research as the IHR, so that will be a shorthand that I'll be using as I introduce the IHR to you, talk a little bit about its activities and staff, and say a little bit more about why you might want to think about it as a possible place to do your MPhil or PhD research. I'll talk to you about the resources that would be available to you if you were to come to the Institute. I'll also talk a little bit about the resources of the University of London more broadly, and indeed London beyond the university itself. I'll say a little bit about our research specialisms, our expertise, the subject areas in which we particularly welcome applications. And then, as Noor has said, we'll have a chance at the end for you to put any questions that you have to me directly, and I'll do my best to answer them. But we also have our admissions colleagues here, so they may be able to answer questions that I can't answer. But first, let's have a look at the Institute. So the Institute has been right at the heart of the historical profession since 1921. We very recently celebrated our first century. It was founded by a historian called A.F. Pollard, who was a great historian of the Tudor period. And it was envisaged as a central place for the discipline of history to really develop alongside the Royal Historical Society, to advocate for history and to support people in the beginning stages of learning how to be a historian. And it continues to do that today. It was also founded as a place that would advocate for history, to make the case for why history matters. And we do that today. The IHR sits within the University of London and specifically within its School of Advanced Study. But we're funded to provide a range of different services to the discipline, which we provide in a number of ways, sometimes online and a lot of the time also in Senate House. And I now just want to say a little bit about Senate House itself, which is the location for the IHR. So Senate House, for those of you who haven't been to it and don't know it and haven't seen pictures of it, is an incredibly elegant, distinctive Art Deco building right at the centre of the University precinct in Bloomsbury. It's next door to the British Museum and a short walk from the British Library. It was designed by Charles Holden, who designed a lot of London's tube stations in the interwar period. And it's such a striking building. It was used by the government's Ministry of Information during the war. I can say a little bit more about anybody who's interested in that later. It has excellent connections to the rest of the country by being so close to the major stations, and it's also very close to the British Library. The top stories of Senate House contain Senate House Library, which I'll say a little bit more about later, and lots of teaching and meeting spaces, as well as the offices of staff who work at Senate House. I mentioned the School of Advanced Study, which the IHR is part of, and it's important just to give you a sense of the breadth of humanities expertise that is gathered together in Senate House under the auspices of the School of Advanced Study. You can see on this slide I've listed all of the institutes, the different institutes that are based either in Senate House or very close by. We also have a digital humanities research hub, and we are also host to the Being Human Festival, which happens every November and is a real celebration of the arts and humanities and the power of the arts and humanities across the UK and now beyond. So the IHR is part of the School of Advanced Study, but it's also part of the University of London. The University of London is a huge undertaking. It has 250,000 students in total, 50,000 staff. It has numerous, I'm sorry, I don't know why my slides keep jumping ahead on a timer and I'm trying to keep control of them, so bear with me while I contain them. The University of London has 17 member institutions. And everybody who's part of the University of London is able to make use of Senate House Library, the library in the Tower, which holds 2 million books and 50 special collections. And the resources of Senate House Library are a real boon to PhD students. I'll say a little bit about the IHR library in a minute, but we very much see our library holdings as in a dialogue and in a complementary relationship with Senate House Library. And this is just to give you a sense of the range of the University of London. All of these, or many of these, are names that you will maybe familiar with, from LSE to Birkbeck to King's, the Royal Academy of Music, SOAS, our very close neighbour, and UCL, of course. All of these institutions are now part of the University of London in this great federation of intellectual, scholarly endeavour. Now, say a little bit about the IHR itself before we talk a little bit more about the programme. The IHR has a number of different activities attached to it. We are a research centre, the Centre for the History of People, Place and Community. We are home to a network called the History and Policy Network, which creates spaces for academics, historians and policymakers to come together and think about what makes good policy. We're home to the long-running Victoria County History, which has been in existence since 1899 and has the rather beautiful aim of writing the history of every county of England. They haven't quite done it yet, but they continue. We're home to a journal, the Historical Research Journal, which I'm one of the editors of. We're home to an online reviews journal, Reviews in History, which invites historians to review books and then invites the authors of those books to respond. And we also have a blog that very many historians from across the UK and beyond contribute to. But the jewel in the IHR crown, if you like, is our library and digital resource. The IHR Library is spectacularly great. It is an open shelf, reference-only research library, and it spreads across the Institute. It's on all of the floors and in different ways. So in the library, you will find primary sources and guides. You will find sources that pertain to the early medieval, but also to the very contemporary. We have a really strong emphasis on place. So you'll find lots of local history, but you will also find history that deals with all parts of the world. You will find lots and lots of print material, but you will also have access in the library to lots of online sources. And I really can't I can't be enthusiastic enough about our library. It's just absolutely marvellous. And one of the most marvellous things about it is the subject specialism of our librarians. And our PhD students get the opportunity to have a series of one-to-one meetings with our librarians just to talk through their project and to think about the resources that we might hold for them, but that are also held in other libraries, whether in Senate House's special collections or elsewhere in London and beyond. We have a physical library, but we also have world-renowned online resources. And the two I want to focus on just on this slide is the Bibliography of British and Irish History, BBIH as we call it, and British History Online, BHO. And together, these two resources kind of cover all the bases of doing a research project. So the bibliography is a tool which allows you to search for everything that has been written by other historians on your topic. And it's a bibliography that was designed explicitly for the kinds of needs that historians have. So it's far better than, say, searching via Google, because you can search by period, you can search by place, you can search by keyword. You have access to PhD theses via BBIH as well. So that covers that off. And then the other online resource we have is British History Online, which is a digital library of largely primary sources, again, that range from Roman and early medieval times to the 20th and 21st century. And British History Online has particular strengths in the history of place and in the history of kind of politics and state papers and government. I just wanted to, in this slide, just show you or pull out one particular project that combines our library, our digital, and also our research interests in the IHR. And this is Layers of London, and I would really strongly advise anybody who's interested in history to have a look at Layers of London if you haven't already come across it. Basically, it digitized historical maps to show quite literally the layered way in which London has developed over the centuries. The lovely thing about it is that it then invited members of the public to add their own histories to it, to add photographs, to contribute stories, or to contribute their own memories of a particular area in London. So it's a gorgeous, gorgeous source, and one that all historians should look at. Also a little bit about the IHR community, which as a MPhil PhD student you would be joining. The IHR is a very distinct community. It's very, very different place to sort of standard history departments across the country. Part of that distinction is that it is a meeting place for people from across very many history departments across the country. This is a picture of our common room. We've recently had this refurbished. It's still looking quite pristine, but it is very well used, and it's a place where our students, researchers, historians all come together to discuss their interest in the past. But we are also, and this is really important for our students, we're home to the UK's largest programme of seminars that are dedicated to history. We have 58 different seminar series that meet regularly during the academic year. So at any given time, there can be 3 or sometimes even 4 different seminars going on in the IHR. And these seminars are convened by historians from across the UK and also beyond. And they bring together historians to hear new research, to talk about new research, and to make suggestions about how to make it better. The seminars are amazing. I'm the convener or one of the conveners of the Women's History Seminar, but they really are a fabulous thing. So even if you end up doing your PhD somewhere else, please look at the IHR website and have a look at the list of seminars and find one that suits your interests and join it and attend it. You can attend online and you can attend in person. So please, if you remember nothing else about what I've said today, please take that away with you because they're just lovely. Wanted to flag another couple of areas in which the IHR sort of sits at the centre of a community. History Lab is an IHR supported organisation. It operates as the national organisation for postgraduate students in history. And it's a social forum, it's an intellectual forum. They run their own seminar. They run events over the course of the year, a big conference here in the IHR in July every year, but conferences elsewhere in the country. There's one coming up in Belfast. There was one last year in Sheffield. They're developing a whole series of local regional hubs. It's a really good way of getting to know other students who are kind of interested in what you're interested in, which is history. We also have communities of fellows. So we have a big community of PGR and early career fellows. We hold fellowships, bursaries for students who are about to complete their PhDs that fund them for the last 6 months. We have bursaries that fund students in what goes next, so postdoctoral funding. And we have very many fellows who are attached to the IHR who want to use the library, who teach on some of our training programs, or who just want to be at a place where history is central to everything that we do. And that kind of critical mass of people coming together from lots of different perspectives is, I think, a really powerful strength of the IHR and a really good thing for MPhil and PhD students to be around. So that's kind of set out the nature of the Institute. And I mean, I've been here, I started in 2021, I came into this role, and I'm still just staggered by what an absolutely lovely place it is to work. And it's lovely partly because of people who work here who are just great, but partly just because the whole purpose of the IHR is to support history and to support historians. And there's something really powerful about being involved in that project, particularly at the moment where history isn't always necessarily being seen as one of the, as important to say STEM subjects in university life. So we really do take seriously our role as an advocate for history, and we encourage our students to make the case for history as well. Now, if you do come and do an MPhil or a PhD at the IHR, most of the details available to you are online, but I'll walk you through some of the kind of broad information. So our full-time PhD students tend to finish in 3 years. Part-time, you register for 6. What happens here, as in a number of other institutions, is that you register first for the MPhil, and then sometime in your second year, you go through an upgrade process whereby you present some of your work to a panel that includes an external examiner. And they help you and comment on you and show you how you can take it to the next step, which is to register as a PhD student. In nearly all circumstances, this is a very straightforward process. But what it does is, through the upgrade, it allows you to get the perspective of somebody beyond your supervisory team, whilst you're still in the process of doing the work. We support both in-person and distance learning modes of study. Distance learning has really kind of taken off after COVID, I think, and we're finding that it actually works really well, not just for students who are located far afield. I mean, I've personally got 2 students who are based in the US at the moment, but also for students who are based in other parts of the UK who just can't come down to London to be in person in the IHR. So we're very attuned to the way in which we need to make distance learning modes of study as vital and as supported as local forms of study. We also now offer a PhD by practice, so I can talk about that in questions if anybody is interested in that. And we are firm believers in dual supervision, or sometimes more than 2 supervisors. In part, that's because if something happens to one of your supervisors, you need to know that there is the other supervisor who's been with you on your journey. But also, there's something very dynamic about a 3-way conversation. I know I certainly love co-supervision because I learn from my students and I learn from the people that I supervise with. And we also offer a comprehensive training program for our students, but also for all history students. So part of our role is to provide a national training program for history students. So our training is a place where our students get to know students in other London universities and in other institutions across the UK. Supervision. So what kind of history do we do? Well, we're quite broad in our range of expertise. Myself, I'm a modernist. I work on 20th century Britain. I work largely on the history of emotion, history of feeling. I've written books on love, I've written on happiness. I'm currently writing about feelings in the workplace since 1945. But we have, I'm a modernist. There are medievalists in the IHR as well, and also early modernists. I would say we have particular expertise in urban history or place-based history, history of the environment. A number of us work on so-called ordinary people, and we've long had expertise in the digital. We have historians who are interested in war, particularly in the history of London. We have a professor of Commonwealth history, decolonisation, Methodism, and the kind of use of medieval history in contemporary society, so-called popular medievalism. But I think across our subject specialisms and our temporal specialisms and our geographical specialisms, we're all very interested in thinking creatively about how you can do history. And that's one of the reasons that we're very keen on our new programme, our PhD by practice programme. But I would say that it infuses our approach to supervision across the board. We want our students to think imaginatively with their sources and to think imaginatively about how they might write history, because there's some just absolutely gorgeous history writing going on at the moment, and we want our students to be part of that. So this just gives you a list of the areas of expertise, really, and you can see it ranges from Caribbean history through history and policy, US political history, early medieval Northumbria. You can see the way scale works here, from quite focused to very broad. And I'll say a little bit more about how you can tap into expertise in talking to potential supervisors in a minute. This is just 3 recently completed PhDs. You can see a bit of the range here. So we've got a study that was a fabulous study, actually, of cameramen during the Second World War. Another one, which was a lovely study of the Children's Country Holidays Fund, an organisation that paid for holidays for London-based children right from the late 19th century through to the 20th. And then an example of quite a focused local history study of South Staffordshire iron industry landscape. I mentioned research training and how the IHR offers research training for its broader constituency across the UK, but that all of this training is available to our students as well. This is the training that's coming up this week. So tomorrow I'll be hosting a session on podcasting for historians. We've got library and digital resource training, which is looking at refugee narratives. And we've also got a session this week on sharing oral history with new audiences. And the training that we do is also linked to the training that goes on in the School of Advanced Study more broadly, some of which will be really relevant. For example, anybody interested in text is probably interested in some of the training that goes on in the Institute for English Studies, for example. Okay, so that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of the Institute, and I really could probably talk about the Institute forever, but I'll stop in a minute. How to apply? Well, the first thing to do is to see whether we are the best place for your topic. We might not be. We cover a lot of history, but we don't cover everything. And when you're moving into this kind of a focused, research-based history making, you really do need to be supported by specialists in your area. Of course, by the time you finish your PhD, you will be the specialist in the area, but you need to make sure that you've got adequate support as you go. So the first thing you should do, if you're interested in the IHR as a place for your PhD, is look at our website, and particularly look at the staff interests on the website as they're outlined on the Study With Us page. Once you've had a look at that and you think, oh yeah, there is somebody whose interests align with mine, contact me informally through my email, which is claire.langhamer@sas.ac.uk, but that's available on our webpage. And just give me a sense of your ideas and who you think might be the best supervisor for them. Once you've done that, I will then put you in touch with that supervisor, and you can work with them to develop your project into a formal proposal, which you can then make a formal application with. So it's a sort of iterative process, but there is also a clear process. Do the research about supervision, contact me as Acting Director of Studies with your plan and with the suggested supervisor, work with them on developing the project, and then put in a formal application. And normally we want to see an MA in history or a related discipline. But we are also open to looking at other forms of expertise and experience amongst our PhD applicants. I think having got to the how to apply slide, I think I will stop talking now, because the key point of these sessions is to offer an opportunity for you to ask your own questions. So I'm going to now turn my slides off and hand back to Noor.
Thank you, Claire. That was very useful and very good set of slides. I particularly liked the previous projects that were done and the kind of themes that they were, because they're so diverse and so interesting, especially the Staffordshire Iron, something so specific compared to something so broad. It's really interesting. We do have some coming in, so just a reminder, everybody, you can put your questions on the chat box in the right side of the page, and I'll read them out to Claire and we can answer them for you. And also keep an eye on the chat box, because my colleague Rebecca has been posting some links in there as well. So one question from Peter, which I think has been answered just at the end there, is I completed an MRes which centered on the spread of ideas from below, particularly the spread of radical ideas in mid-19th century industrial centers. How do I connect to a possible supervisor to ensure that the IHR is the right place to study? So.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Thank you for that. Well, first of all, that sounds great. I mean, that just sounds really, really lovely. There are a number of people at the IHR who are interested in kind of histories from below in different ways. my colleague Ruth Slatter is particularly interested in that kind of 19th century people that, history of people from below. I'm interested in it from a 20th century perspective. I've done a lot of work on mass observation. But if you just email me and send me your, however, developed they are, your ideas, I can have a look at it and, see who might be best suited to support you in that. I mean, because we're a national centre, the other thing that we often find ourselves doing is that if people write to us about their project and we don't think that we're necessarily the right place for them, we tend to give you advice about who might be best placed to support your project, because we tend to know the rest of the discipline quite well. So it might be that you send me your ideas and I go back to you and say, well, actually, we might not be the best place, but these places are. Have you thought about talking to so and so? That's the kind of contract of being a historian, really. You want to make sure that PhD students have the best possible supervision. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, that does sound good. Hopefully that's helped answer Peter's question as well. Another question is, how different is studying in the MRes to a PhD? Is there much of a jump in this type of studying there is, considering MRes is also research-based?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I having not done an MRes myself, there may be other, but I have supervised them. And I think then there's not a huge difference in that, with an MRes and a PhD, you're doing a lot of research on your own under expert sort of coaching and mentoring and guidance. But the key thing with a PhD is this demand, and this exciting demand, that it really should be a piece of original scholarship. And I think that's the real difference. The knowledge that you're doing something that is an intervention in its own right. You're writing a huge piece of work when you're doing a PhD. You're writing 100,000 words, and in years to come, other historians are going to be consulting your work. So I think it's the sort of the scale is important. Keeping the scale in terms of keeping that kind of size of project in your head, that can be quite tricky. And also the fact that most PhDs do get turned into books at some point. And so it's very much thinking about it as a book as you're working through it, even as you're presenting it as a thesis. Supervision, probably I should say a little bit about the nature of supervision. It might be a way of differentiating it from the MRes. Because the PhD goes on over many years, if you're a part-time student, it might go on over 6 years. You build up a very close relationship with your supervisory team. And it's really important. It has to be a relationship of deep trust, because you're trusting your supervisor to support you in the right way and to advise you in the right way. And your supervisor is trusting you to keep your end of the bargain, which is to do the research and write the PhD. So that relationship can be an intense one. And it can often be one that lasts for years afterwards. I still write references for students that I supervised in the early 2000s. And it's one of the joys of being a PhD supervisor, is watching your students' careers develop, sometimes within academia and sometimes in other places, in very exciting other places. So yeah, there is a difference, and it's kind of, I suppose, it's the intensity and the depth.
That makes sense. Thank you. You mentioned a couple of times the PhD by practice. Can you talk a bit more about that, please, and just explain what that is?
Yes. So the PhD by practice is a different kind of thing. You basically create a piece of a piece of creative practice as part of the process. So that might be a novel. It might be a web resource. It might be all sorts of an exhibition. or something like that. And then the written part of it is your critical reflections on the process of doing that. Now, the reason that we decided to introduce the PhD by practice, both within the school broadly and specifically within the IHR, is that we're very aware that, I mean, people love history out in the world. There are so many different ways in which people are doing history. I mean, you only have to turn your telly on of an evening and there'll be like about 1 billion different TV shows that are history-based going on. And, you know, go into a bookshop and the history shelves are heaving with history podcasting. We've recently, I'm actually in our podcasting studio at the moment, which we opened within the IHR earlier this year for historians to record their own podcasts. And, you know, again, being creative. So it's a way of harnessing that a little bit and saying to people, well, you might actually not want to write a 100,000 word thesis. You might want to write a piece of creative, historically informed fiction, and then write a critical commentary about that. But it still has to kind of amount to the kind of weight of 100,000 words, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Thank you. It's quite a unique way of studying, I suppose. Is it something that a lot of universities offer around the UK, the PhD by practice?
I think it's growing. It's growing. I mean, I've supervised an MA thesis, an MA program that involved a sort of practice element to it, and that was somebody who was developing a kind of fictional account. Some of us in the institute have done a little bit of this in our own work, sort of engaging with more sort of imaginative ways of writing history, and this is something that's happening quite a lot beyond the IHR. I mean, we're certainly not the only people who are thinking about how to write and engage with, how to write imaginatively, but also how to engage with kind of creative practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Another question, you mentioned that there is a distance learning option. Is there a disadvantage to studying this? Is there anything students will miss out on by choosing the distance learning option?
Oh, that's a really good question. I suppose it depends on your perspective. So I think some of our distance learners, so I'm thinking of one of my students at the moment who is going to make a visit from the US to the UK over the summer to do some archival work, because there is stuff that they need to access in person at the National Archive in Kew. So they are kind of grouping their stuff into one sort of journey in order to do that. And I mean, that it is entirely possible to do a PhD by distance learning using digitized sources, because there are now so many sources digitized. I mean, the source that I've spent a lot of my career working on, which is a source called the Mass Observation Archive, that's all digitized now. So I never need to actually go there to look at it. I can just, look at it online. But the question of loss is that I still love touching sources and touching things that people in the past touched. So I suppose that's less a question about the distance learning in-person thing and more about using digital or in-person archives. So supervision, I think it makes very little difference. Some of my in-person students, I have supervisions with them online for various reasons. So I think whether you're dialing in from New York or you're dialing in from Hull, we're still talking online. It's nice to come to the institute itself if you can. I mean, I genuinely love Senate House. I think it is one of the most stunning, beautiful buildings in London, and in part because of that tower that is just full of books. I mean, it's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. The idea of having a tower of books. So
Inspired 1984, the novel as well.
It's just,
yeah.
I mean, it's just, yeah, absolutely would. I mean, it is just walking around this building because it has so much history attached to it. Because, one of Beveridge Hall was being used by the international press during the Second World War. You walk in and you can almost hear sort of, imagine everybody there kind of rushing out with the messages about what was going on. So I think that's a loss, because it would be nice to come and see Senate House, but then you've got graduation, which hopefully you come to see. And then, I am going to guarantee all of my distance learners that they get a full tour of Senate House when they come for graduation.
Yeah.
It is a lovely, lovely building.
It is, absolutely.
I think in terms of just doing the work and doing the supervision, it's fairly straightforward for distance learners.
That's great. Thank you. A question from Anna. She's asking about researching different localities. For example, she's interested in modern Greece, but within the scope of the topics that you mentioned of place, identity, urban history. So is this an idea that could potentially fit into the expertise of the centre?
Yeah, it would. What we would probably, I think the centre would be able to offer my colleagues in the centre would offer the kind of conceptual framing for that project. But in that case, we might want to look beyond the core IHR staff for a second supervisor within our fellowship who would be able to offer the specific expertise in modern Greece. And I think that's often how dual supervision works. You have somebody who is an expert in the particular place and or time, place and time usually, and somebody who has that more kind of conceptual, theoretical framing for the project.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is, I'm based in the United States, so what might a semester look like for someone based abroad?
Yes. Okay, so one of the things about the IHR is that we don't we don't feel time in the same way that other universities feel time. I don't know whether you find that in your part of the university, Noor, but it feels like we're always on the go. So, we do have formal term times or semesters. I think we still talk about them as terms, actually. But we, as a researcher and as an IHR employee, historian, and also as a student, your supervisions tend to roll on. So a typical pattern of supervision for a new student is that you will have contact in the first couple of terms with your supervisor every couple of weeks. Now, it might not be a full-on 1-hour seminar each time, but we're keeping an eye on you and wanting to kind of keep you close at this formative part of the project. Further down the line, your supervisions will probably be monthly. And we do, of course, acknowledge that everybody needs holidays and people need to build in, when they're thinking about their timetable for the project as a whole, build in time for family time, holiday time, just like not doing history time. But on the whole, supervision tends to roll through the year. It's kind of different in that way to a talk programme, which is very tightly bounded by academic terms.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Another question we have from Prapya. I want to pursue a PhD in environmental history of South Asia. Do you think the IHR is the perfect place? And if so, what are the funding options available?
Okay, so I'd want to look at your project to see whether we can offer supervision for that. We certainly have a lot of expertise in environmental history, but that expertise in the IHR tends to be of a medieval environmental history perspective. So we do have environmental humanities scholars elsewhere in the school. So we'd have to look at your precise needs and see whether we would be able to offer the expertise that you need. So I think the answer to that is email me and let me know what it is precisely that you're interested in.
Great, thank you. We have a few minutes left, so any final questions in the chat box, please pop them there. Another question is about the other institutes at the School of Advanced Study. Is there much that happens with them when you're a PhD student for the IHR? Is there much collaborative work or opportunities?
Yes, so I think one of the, apart from the building being so spectacularly gorgeous, one of the lovely things about the School of Advanced Study is the connection across the institutes. So, and that is a connection that isn't just at, or is both at the level of our students and also the level of our staff. We work very closely with the other institutes. So, for example, I think in 2 weeks' time, we're doing a collaboration with the Warburg and also with the Institute of English Studies on a session on tarot. Because Warburg have been running an exhibition about historical tarot cards. We're interested in it, English is interested in it, so we'll get together to do something about the history of tarot cards. We often work closely with our colleagues in the Institute of Legal Studies because law and history are such closely linked disciplines, and many historians are interested in the history of law, and many of those working in legal studies are interested in history as well. So there's endless opportunities for people to work together within the school itself, within the student body. There are a number of ways in which students can get together. Now, the first way in which that happens is through induction, which is run as a hybrid opportunity for students. So you get to meet your cohort across the school at a very early stage. There's also a society called Society, Society, which creates student-led events. They had a conference relatively recently that was quite a major undertaking. So there's the opportunity for sort of student organised activity. And then your supervisors will sort of push you to make contacts. So we have our own work in progress series for our IHR students, but we also have a couple of students, one from English and one from Classics, who their supervisors told them to get in touch with me, and so now they're included in those sessions because they're kind of working in quite similar areas to what our students are working in. And history is innately collaborative as a discipline. I mean, it's, people often think of history as something that is really, you're just in an archive on your own, just looking at dusty old documents from the past. And some of us do that sometimes, but a lot of the time history is about dialogue with other people. It's about, wanting to have conversations and wanting to support the scholarship of other people. All of which is to say, yes, there are opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Sounds very interesting and quite a unique kind of collaborative place to study, which maybe other universities wouldn't offer so much. We have one final question. What are the chances of getting a scholarship for an international student?
So funding is really difficult at the moment. I think everybody understands that. We have a scholarship for mature students, by which we mean over 25s. And there are also some broader opportunities for funding that are emerging, by the research councils. But on the whole, we do not have a lot of funding available, I'm afraid. And I think that is not unusual within the sector at the moment. Available funding for PhDs is limited, and there isn't much of it, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Honest answer, but we do have a fees and funding page, which my colleague can post in the chat box, and that will give you any kind of options that might be available, maybe from the broader School of Advanced Study point of view. even if it's not through the IHR directly. But thank you so much, Claire. That's the end of the webinar. So thank you, Claire, for your time today. I hope everybody found the webinar useful and has helped answer some of your questions about the program or about the application process. That's the end of the webinar today. My colleague is...
Could I just add a final thing?
Yes.
Can I just say to everybody who's here, whether you end up applying to the IHR or not, please do, whatever you end up doing, wherever you end up doing your history, please do come to the IHR website, have a look at all of the resources, the training, the seminars, the events that we run, because all of this is available to everybody, anybody interested in the past, and do get in touch with me if you would like to just sort of think through a particular PhD project a little bit more.
Great, thank you. We do have Claire's email address in the chat box, and like she said, visit the IHR website. You can contact any of the other supervisors. We've also posted the link to our Contact Us form for the School of Advanced Studies, so any kind of administrative questions that you might have, we can answer them there. We'll end on Colin's message at the end, who said, thank you all for arranging today's session. It has been most useful, and I hope that's true for everyone else. So thank you, Claire. Bye-bye, everybody.